Abilene, Texas. So this is western part of Texas, and it is actually our fastest growing market in the U.S. Traveler growth is up over 400% year on year. And you might be thinking like, well, what's going on in Abilene? Well, the big thing going on in Abilene is that ChatGPT and Oracle, and known as Stargate, announced they're building the world's largest data center. And this is a trend that people really need to be on top of.
Welcome to the Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the leader and largest online marketplace for midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
Today, we are joined by Furnished Finder CEO and President Jeff Hurst. Jeff, many of you already are familiar with, but if you're not, he is the former COO of Expedia Group, President of VRBO, and Chief Strategy Officer of HomeAway. So, Jeff, thanks for joining us as always. What would you like to kick us off with today?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show, and very excited to be talking about tenant trends today and just what we're seeing around the United States and midterm rentals.
Today, we're going to talk about what we have noticed within the four walls of Furnished Finder as far as tenant trends, top markets, underserved markets, and what's happening in the world economically that is positioning monthly rentals with their opportunities. So let's talk about first what the leading monthly tenant traveler types are. So Jeff, I'll let you speak to this a little bit, but some of the categories we're seeing are business, digital nomad, healthcare, relocation. Tell us a little bit about what we're seeing with who's filling the doors of these Furnished Finder properties.
Yeah, I mean, a few things have, changed over the last year. I think the most exciting thing is that overall demand's growing 6 or 7 times as fast as supply. We'd love to have more supply because we think we probably are starting to need more of it. And so, encouraging people to add inventory, but, demand is growing 6 or 7 times as fast. When we look at booking requests, and so keep in mind the site has booking requests, it has send a message, and it has phone reveals. Booking requests are up roughly 100% year on year. And now they're up more than total travelers because we're really encouraging it because landlords gave us feedback that they like all the extra information in booking requests. But booking requests are up roughly 100% year on year. When we look at the top demand sources, business has now become, traveling for work is the largest, non-healthcare. And that has, a ton of what you'd expect, corporate travel, but it also has a big growing segment of construction travel. The second largest is healthcare. Healthcare is about 25%, and we are very glad to see it starting to be at least stable and probably starting to grow again, which is a big change from the last 2 or 3 years. And then the fastest growing category is actually relocation. And so relocation, dislocation, a lot of people talk about insurance a lot in the space. That's included here. But the big driver of this is people moving. And so they're not moving because of insurance. They're moving from Seattle to Austin. They don't know where to live. They don't want to move their furniture twice. And so they rent a place for 3 months, for 6 months to kind of try before you buy the neighborhood. And that's the fastest growing category right now. And we think a lot of it's because mortgage rates are high. A lot of it's because there is a housing crunch and affordability is a problem. And so people are just being more creative in how they live and trying things on in this. And it's the fastest growing of everything we've seen.
What I find interesting is, in addition to relocation, one of those fastest growing industry types is long-term housing. So tell us about some of those tenant trends within the industry that Furnished Finder is really the answer for.
Yeah, I think, when we look within each of the buckets, long-term housing has become quite different than what I expected when I got here a year and a half ago. And so I kind of thought of it as digital nomads, which we track separately. Digital nomads are constantly moving. Long-term housing, we're seeing more and more people rent a furnished place on our home for 4 months, extend again, and all of a sudden it's just their house. It's just where they live in a way that may not have been the plan in the first place, but it was a good, affordable solution. They became kind of anchored in the neighborhood and it worked out for the landlord and the tenant. And so that's been a fascinating one to watch. Insurance has been really interesting too. Not that there's necessarily more of it, but more of the large platforms are starting to use our service, as a gateway to find landlords because they see the value in not paying a 10 to 15% service fee to Airbnb. And there's just a lot of opportunity for us to keep reinforcing that as a community that these use cases are going to keep growing, and we're an excellent marketplace for them.
We're talking about these tenants staying in these properties longer and longer, and some of them using as long-term housing via extensions. So what are we seeing with other players in the market like Zillow that are giving us confidence with Furnished Finder about how we're doing things?
Yeah, Zillow is a wonderful platform, not only in terms that they help people find tenants also. They don't have nearly the same furnished midterm amount of inventory that we have, but they are a great source of tenants, and even more so, they're a great source of information. And so I always look forward to when Zillow publishes their quarterly research blogs. They recently published their Q1 blog where they talk about the Zillow rent index and what's happening across markets. And the typical asking rent in the U.S. has reached over $2,000. That's now more than 30% of the average household's income is going towards rent. And so this affordability is supporting that prior trend I mentioned around long-term housing. And that supports why we think that, there's also a little bit more shift into rooms. Not only our product where we have almost 60,000 rooms, people just getting started may choose to start off in a room as opposed to getting a whole place, but also even other business models. And so, Padsplit's a company that we know pretty well, and they're doing something in this space too to help approach this affordability crisis. And a lot of markets are seeing increases in rent right now.
So, Jeff, one of the things that's most fascinating is traveler behavior. So, how has some of that changed in the past year?
Yeah, the biggest change has been in the number of tenants per stay. And so what we've seen is that over the past year, in particular because of that relocation dynamic where people are moving and often moving with their families, but also long-term housing, the number of tenants per stay or tenants per search is how we look at it, has gone from 1.6 to 2.6. And so that's a whole extra person. And, we think that's starting to fuel need for more inventory types, a little bit beyond just the rooms and the studios and into the one bedrooms, two bedrooms, and even larger formats. The rest of it, we did see a slight increase in the average search to say, and I think that's related to that. You typically know if you're going to move, so you can start your search a little bit earlier, but search to say is about 36 days now. Think of that of when you start your search versus when you're planning to move in. More and more people are bringing pets. I don't think that's like a wholly new trend, but we do see that almost a third of all booking requests include a pet request now. And something that's really interesting, we recently ran a survey, which for the first time helped us understand the gender of tenants on our site. And for most, not surprisingly, travel nurse, overwhelming majority, I think over 70% are women, but actually across the entire site, over 60% are women. And use cases like relocation, it's 2/3. Use cases like corporate travel, a little bit lower, just under 50%. And then use cases like digital nomad, long-term housing, also majority women. And so something to think about as you're like just considering who's the searcher, who's the person that's, in there looking at the pictures and making the decision. More often than not, it's going to be a woman in terms of that decision maker for these occasions.
I think these are also important notes because if you have a property that you're sitting on and you're saying, I'm not going to list it until I'm completely ready, until it's completely furnished, I have every last thing buttoned up, the average book to stay window is about 36 days, like Jeff was saying. So it's important to get it up sooner than later. You can keep editing it, you can keep tweaking it, you can keep improving it, but you don't want to miss that window. There are travelers who are of course looking, closer to their stay or further out, but you can't get a tenant if you aren't listed on the site, right? So I think that's really important for everybody to remember. And if you're not accepting pets, think about what you can do to accept pets, whether it's getting a damage waiver for your property, whether it's having an increased security deposit, whatever that is. But you want to make sure that you're appealing to these tenants that are searching. So, all right, let's talk about what we have discovered with the monthly rentals term and how tenants are searching for monthly rentals versus midterm rentals.
Absolutely. So we have been looking a lot at Google Trends and our own marketing profile to just understand like how do people talk about the category? And I think it's been unique that the way we talk about the category, not only at Furnished Finder, but Landlord Diaries and even, most of the kind of thought leaders and influencers in the space say midterm rentals. That's not how tenants and in particular new shoppers think about it. They say monthly rentals. I need a monthly furnished rental. I need a monthly rental. And so the search behavior for that is wildly disproportionate. Everyone is searching for monthly rentals. And so what you'll see on our site, and it's like 50 times as many, is that we've actually started to emphasize that language throughout the Furnished Finder experience. and are encouraging people to use it, as you introduce the category or your home to others as well, because it is more specific. It is month to month rentals and frequently 90 days, but midterm means different things to different people. And we want to be as specific as possible with not only our marketing, but our product offer.
I think this was a fantastic discussion about tenant trends and some of those things that have changed from this year versus last year. One question that we get often is, well, where should I invest? If I'm going to go ahead and make the choice to furnish my property as a midterm rental, I want to know that it's going to do well. So let's start off with our top markets. We would like to highlight some different areas that are great opportunities that we're seeing right now. But in general, how do you kind of know that a midterm rental or a monthly rental is a good fit in your market, Jeff? What's your opinion as CEO of Furnished Finder?
Yeah, and so I think there's the starting place is to use our site. Look at how much inventory is available nearby. Use our stats page. It is a good resource. I'm not going to say it's a great resource because we think we can make a great resource to replace it. And so I'll talk a little bit as we go through and talk through the different markets and demand areas, how to use the stats page and what the limitations and advantages are. But know behind the scenes, a lot of the information I'm going to share today isn't available on the stats page yet. It's our internal data that we publish to think about where the top opportunities are. And our commitment is to try and get more and more of this information available to you, either on our site or through partners, so that you can make the most informed decisions as possible. I always encourage people to do three things. Actually four. Start on Furnished Finder and shop to see, what does stats page say and what inventory is out there. The second thing I do, I think the biggest competition is usually Airbnb. Go to Airbnb and see what the housing are, in particular housing that's taking 30-day stays or has 30-day minimums. How are they priced? What does it look like? Next thing, your next competition is probably Zillow. And think about, okay, what's available on Zillow? Unfurnished in particular, what's there? And what does it look like compared to my offer? And finally, go look to see what hotels are near you. Is there an extended stay America? Is there a Homewood Suites? And then also, if not, if it's a Hilton or a Marriott or a higher end hotel, you're really thinking about the inventory on those four places and how yours fits in. Because depending on the tenant type, you don't know if you're competing with the hotel or you're competing with Zillow, maybe more long-term, or you're competing with Airbnb, maybe more digital nomad, or, Furnished Finder, maybe more of the travel nurse and, that type of demographic. And so those are the calibration points. And then what we'll talk a little bit about is how to use stats page to really hone it in and know whether you're onto something. But, my biggest encouragement is try it out. It's $179. We're often running promos to help find new customers. And that is really worth it when the, average landlord's going to sign up and make over $12,000 on our site. There's a good opportunity here to just try it out and see what happens.
Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Furnished Finder, the ultimate platform for hassle-free midterm rentals. Whether you're a seasoned landlord or just getting started, Furnished Finder has everything you need to find your next tenant. With Furnished Finder, you can say goodbye to booking fees, markups, and commissions, and hello to direct bookings. If you're ready to experience all the benefits renting your property for 30 days or more, head over to furnishedfinder.com where you can list your property for one low annual price. We make it easy to get started.
Yeah, I think that's right, because there truly is midterm rentals, monthly rentals. The research here is it is data driven. And like Jeff said, we're trying to get more and more of that data at the fingertips of our users, but it's also a little bit of an art. And the environment is changing quickly. There's different drivers to these monthly tenants. So we're going to dig into these markets here as examples. But what I want everybody to remember is when we're talking about a specific market here, don't just think about, ooh, this market could be a great one to invest in, but also listen to the reasons and see what you can extrapolate and say, okay, is any of that apply to any of the markets that I'm already in or that I'm interested in or that might be really convenient for me? Because what we're not saying here is everybody needs to run to these markets. What we're saying is here's why these markets are great, and this is what's driving monthly rentals. So, all right, let's dive in. First, we're going to talk about some of the small markets that have really big demand. So first, let's talk about Abilene, Texas, Jeff.
All right, Abilene, Texas. So this is western part of Texas, and it is actually our fastest growing market in the U.S. Traveler growth is up over 400% year on year. And you might be thinking like, well, what's going on in Abilene? Well, the big thing going on in Abilene is that ChatGPT and Oracle, and known as Stargate, announced they're building the world's largest data center. And this is a trend that people really need to be on top of, is think about like, how do you get alerts on where big data centers and infrastructure are going in? Because usually by design, they put these in places where there's abundant power and low population because they want to use the power for the data center. And so that's what's happening in Abilene. And what you're seeing is they need thousands and thousands of housing units for temporary workers to come build the data center. But they're not going to need all of it in 4, 5, 6 years as the data center comes online. And so there's a huge need for temporary housing, and in particular furnished housing. And so it's opened up opportunities for people to do more arbitrage. It's opened up for people opportunities to think about modular homes and what they can build and how they can supply these types of dynamics. There's a similar thing happening outside of Monroe, Louisiana. There's another data center, I think, slated to go in near Hillsborough, Texas. There's an explosion of it, and it's going to keep happening. And Abilene is probably the best use case for it. When you look at the stats page, you'll see we only have 100 housing units in Abilene. They're all going to be booked. 100 housing units, 56,000 page views. I've talked to people in the industry who say like somewhere around 300 page views per listing is where it gets interesting. I don't think it's that hard and fast to rule, but at 560, it's interesting. And the question's really like, is there housing available or how can you help them solve it?
Yeah, the data centers are a really interesting development. My brother lives in a tiny town, and when I'm talking tiny town, I mean his town is one street. It is quite literally like old school America, the tiniest town ever. And there is a data center going in right in that area because land is cheap. It's close to a larger city, but it's a lot less expensive to develop where he is. And all of a sudden, this one street town is about to have some people who are in there working. So this is going to be really interesting to see how these develop over the next few years. So a couple other cities that we are seeing in the small markets are Juneau and Butte, Montana, which might feel incredibly random to listeners, but let's touch on what is driving the demand in these two cities and how it might affect other cities as well.
Yeah, and so let's start with Juneau. And I think Juneau and Abilene are both really interesting use cases for how to think about the stats page. So our stats page, which again, we are going to rebuild, currently gives the opportunity to pick 10, 20, or 40 miles from the city center. 10 miles from the city center of Abilene is nothing but Abilene. You've got a perfectly pure view of it, and so it works great. If you're in a market like the greater Seattle area, or maybe, Manhattan's a good example, 10 miles of Manhattan, you've got Jersey, Bronx, all of Queens, like it's difficult to get a purer read, and that's why we're going to refine it. Juneau's interesting because within 10 miles of the city center of Juneau, which is big, we don't have any inventory. We actually do have almost 100 listings in greater Juneau, but the way that we calculate it doesn't give you a very fair representation. It says we have 33,000 page views, and that we have 0 housing units. So you've got to really emphasize in some of these markets, when you look at the map of search, in particular, really big geographic markets, it's a great sign that there's that many page views, but you've actually got to go open a Furnished Finder to get a better feel for, just by seeing the search page, we actually have, 100 searchable listings there. So what do you learn from it? I think a lot of things are happening in Juneau. One, a lot of the migration is actually traveling for work. There's a big construction boom. There's a lot of infrastructure projects. And so people are moving there for that. It's affordable. And so people are looking for the opportunity to stay in single family homes and Furnished Finder type of inventory instead of hotels. And we think that this is something that's actually going to be quite sustainable for that market. And we're excited to meet more Alaskans and add more inventory in Juneau.
And this is also a good opportunity just to, go to Alaska and have it be a research trip, because if you've never been to Alaska, it's one of the coolest places in the world. So I think I should probably use this as an opportunity to just say, like, I'm going to have to expense a trip and go check it out.
Hey landlords, are you ready to level up your rental game and simplify your midterm rental business? Well, get ready to meet your new best friend, KeyCheck. KeyCheck is your all-in-one solution for stress-free property management. With tenant-paid screenings, online rent payment processing, custom lease creation, and a suite of incredible landlord tools, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. No more chasing down checks or sifting through piles of applications. KeyCheck helps you organize and manage all things landlording in a simple and efficient way. Make landlord life a breeze with KeyCheck, the game changer for modern property owners. Visit keycheck.com to unlock the power of stress-free property management and take your rental business to new heights.
Well, I'm excited to discuss our next tenant trends, and that's medium markets that need more inventory now. So what are we seeing as some of those top locations, Jeff?
Yeah, and so as a reminder, the way we do this analysis, we take small markets, which we consider to be 100 to 500 listings, medium markets, which are 500 to 1,000 listings, and then large markets have more than 1,000 listings. And so we're not looking at a lot of what I'd say are like the micro markets or the longer tail, which can be really interesting. So I'm not discouraging them. It's just hard for us to look at all of those. One, because there's tens of thousands, and two, because it's hard to know whether it's statistically significant or just a little bit noisy in the data. So when we look at the medium markets, a couple things stand out. So the top performing medium market for us was Portland, Maine. Exciting news in that the biggest tenant type there is traveling healthcare. And when we look at the stats page there, we see that they've had 353,000 page views. And I do like page views as a metric more than map searches. And so, you'll typically hear me look at and talk about page views, which is how many times the PDP page loaded your homepage. How many times did we get a tenant to go look at it? We have almost 600 housing listings there. And so that's, just under 600 page views per listing. We mentioned earlier that 560 is really good, 600 is really good. And so this is an encouraging sign. And what we see for Portland is that, this totally matches our internal data. We're on average seeing, almost 5 travelers per listing in Portland. When you're staying 3 to 4 months, like 5 travelers is more than enough demand for the entire city to be fully booked for the year. And so we're trying to bring on more inventory to serve Portland, Maine. Another worth talking about, and this will be the last time I talk about Alaska, but it comes up again, is Anchorage, Alaska is one where they're looking to add almost 3,000 jobs next year. A lot of construction, a lot of healthcare. Just like Juneau, our stats page shows 0 housing units there. And so it's one of those things where be sure and double click, go see what you see on our platform in the search experience, but 255,000 page views. And so a ton of demand for a city of that size. There are a lot of opportunity here to basically serve this use case. And if you think about it, moving to Anchorage that's a commitment. And so people do want to try before you buy and be in a place that feels more like home. And so we expect to see a lot more oil industry jobs there. And a lot of this construction is going to keep this market booming for quite a bit of time because there's not enough in-state workers to get it going. The other one I'd talk about is Milwaukee. Milwaukee's doing a big downtown revitalization project. They have 357,000 page views per our stat page, just under 700 housing units. That's over 500 per listing. So, again, a lot of people think 300 is a good rule. When you're in that 500-600 range, you're really on to something. And as they keep adding more jobs downtown and doing more construction, they're going to keep needing to kind of feed that infrastructure and have more people traveling for work to come help build Milwaukee. And as Milwaukee downtown gets more vibrant, you're going to also see more people living there as digital nomads, more people potentially relocating there. And so I think there is a virtuous cycle here and could be something really exciting for Milwaukee.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see as the economy continues to develop which cities we see this development within, right? It's likely not going to be the San Franciscos of the world because those are so expensive and saturated right now. There's going to be some movement in these mid to small size cities where companies can expand, do these projects, and invest into the infrastructure where it is a lot more affordable. And when they might not have the workers right there, they'll pull them in to build, right? Alaska is incredibly popular to go work for 6 months and then go back to where you were from for 6 months, right? And have kind of a seasonal experience. So I think just kind of from, a 30,000 foot view that's really interesting to see as we kind of move into this next era of affordability and see how do companies adapt their growth to that. So, all right, final section. Let's talk about these major cities where demand is still outpacing supply and the themes that we are seeing here. So, Jeff, I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much. So major cities. So the list of five, we grouped together basically Silicon Valley, and so there's obviously a lot of cities in there, but we started with Palo Alto as kind of a central point for it. That was number one on our list, and I think a lot of it is exactly what Katie was talking about, of like because there's so little affordable housing and even affordable hotels. There's a use case where there's really an opportunity to serve people in this space, and not surprisingly, Silicon Valley is almost all traveling for work, less construction, a little bit more on kind of the white collar nomad or technology jobs. And I'll come back to talking a bit more about each of these in detail. But the list of big cities was Silicon Valley number one, Chicago number two, Seattle number three. Chicago and Seattle were all both traveling for work. Boston, not surprisingly, with a huge healthcare infrastructure there, is number four, but the top tenant use case was actually traveling healthcare. And then San Francisco clocks in at number five in our top five markets. So when we look at Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, and then again, this is within 10 miles of it, over a million map searches, but over 650,000 page views in the past on the stats page. And when you look at that on the stats page, there's about 500 homes there. And so that's over 1,000 page loads per listing. That's kind of like best in class. And so there really is a need for more inventory there. And the question is whether you can bring inventory online at a price point that's appealing for this working class. But we think there is this is not something that's going to end. And when we look at the trends here, the rents for these largest metro areas are actually up among the most of anywhere. In particular, Chicago is a good example there. The rent's up almost 6% in the past year. And when we look at Chicago, what we see is there's been, less than Silicon Valley, but 880,000 page views. That's with 1,500 housing units. And so, again, you're over that magic number. You're at 600 again. Over 300 is interesting. Over 600, there's really something happening. And for us, what we see in Chicago is this kind of traveling for work. And in particular, there's a seasonal element to it that makes it really appealing for the midterm space. And a great opportunity if potentially, and Chicago's a market that's had some short-term limitations on their model, but an opportunity potentially hybrid. If you do have a short-term license, can you use midterm as an add-on strategy? Maybe you're midterming in the winter and you're short-terming some in the summer, or maybe you're midterming in the winter and using it in the summer. Those different strategies are becoming more and more viable, and people are using our platform more and more for that. Rounding out the list, what I'd say about Seattle, similar dynamics, over 700 page views per listing, really healthy infrastructure there. A tougher market to diagnose. Seattle has a lot of water. It has a lot of lakes. It's, the commuter time is not as easy to understand. And so more than anything there, I'd say kind of go back to those first principles and be sure you're checking. What do you see on Furnished Finder? How does your house stand up? And then what do you see on the other platforms? And how does your price stand up? And are you excited about that to be able to be competitive in these larger markets? And then Boston, a lot of healthcare. The big thing that signals is smaller footprint. And so, you can be a lot more successful there with that studio one bedroom. Whereas potentially in some of the other markets, you're seeing as much or more migration business, and you can have a different type of outfit, but also explore some different and larger inventory types.
Yeah, I think it's very important, as you're saying, to get to know the characteristics of the market that you are either in or that you are considering, right? A lot of people only look at the numbers. The numbers are fantastic, but really it's what are those numbers telling us? What's driving those numbers? And that's something that we wanted to give you guys with Jeff here today is, Boston, for example, like we just touched on, has great numbers, but what's driving that? It is the small footprint. It's the drive to healthcare. There's a huge healthcare presence there, right? So getting to know, and I think that's the part that I want everybody who's looking at potentially getting their first midterm rental, their next one, entering a new market, don't just look at these numbers, but look at what's driving it, right? Do some research into the city and see what are the development goals, what's going on, what businesses are headed there. All of those things, they're going to tell you a lot as well. And then you can put some meaning behind these numbers like we're doing for these markets for you. And it's going to give you a much more complete story for you to understand the opportunity, for you to understand who you're appealing to, how to stand out in the search. Because even if you have properties in these markets right now, you still need to know, how do you operate your rental really well? How do you stand out? How do you make sure you're appealing to these travelers, right? It's super important, and it's important even if you're in a market that is maybe a little bit more saturated. So don't forget your basics. Don't forget to know kind of the story of your market and what is driving it. So let's talk a little bit more just to kind of wrap things up here. We've talked about this in bits and pieces. The Furnished Finder stats page is furnishedfinder.com/stats, STATS. You will need to log in when you get there. Your account is free to create. But tell us, Jeff, your favorite ways to use that stats page, because like you said, we have data there. We're going to have more at some point. But if you're exploring that page as a user for the first time, what are some tips and tricks and advice that you would give a user to explore that page?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to look at that ratio of, it's described on the page as property listing page views. And think of that as like, someone searching and they click on a listing and it loads the property page. And so that's the number of page views that we've loaded in the past 12 months. And so looking at it for Palo Alto right now, 650,000. So it's the ratio of page views to the amount of inventory in the area, I think, is the most important thing. So you start there. The rest of the page helps you with some, indications. How much is a whole place priced? How much is a private room priced? What's the distribution of inventory between 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom? But I don't think those are instructive enough to base a decision on. That's where you need to go back and do more of the analysis of, okay, here's how I fit into Furnished Finder. And I really like the advice that Katie's been giving on Landlord Diaries for a long time now, of like, your backup plan is a long-term rental. Your backup plan is to go rent it for a year. So go see what Zillow or apartments.com or homes.com has near you and what that annual pricing is. And in particular, what we've noticed on their sites recently is they're adding a lot of less than year furnished inventory, but it's almost all multifamily. And so think about like the big box multifamily housing complex near you. Potentially they've turned 10 of those into furnished monthly rentals. Go find out the price, and then just think about, how much would someone rather be in my home versus that home at that price? And if you think you're competitive, like, there's a lot of smart money there. They've invested a lot in understanding where they're going to be. And between that and, your extended stay hotel or your Marriott, you can really calibrate if you have a good value to offer. And I think like that's the thing I'd most hone in on. The stats page helps there's people searching and there's people who want something. You have to own whether you've got a great something to offer. And that really comes down to how compelling is that property details page? How compelling is your listing? But how compelling is it relative to the price? And just keep in mind, someone's shopping it against a $130 a night extended stay America that might be $4,000, $4,000 a month. And then they're shopping it against something they saw on Zillow and something they saw on Airbnb. And if you can have a great business being cheaper and better, that is a great business. And that's what we think Furnished Finder as a platform is, and what we're looking for more and more landlords to help contribute to your success on the platform.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes that I see new landlords make, or landlords who are maybe entering a new market or a new strategy of monthly rentals, maybe they have a larger property for the first time or a smaller property for the first time, is they make a fantastic listing and then they leave it. And then a month later, I might meet them at a conference or something. They say, I'm not getting anything. And I'm like, well, what have you tried? And they're like, well, my listing looks beautiful. And I'm like, your listing does look beautiful, but you're still getting to know this market or this tenant base or this property type with monthly rentals. Have you tried a different price? Have you tried a different deposit level? Have you tried different photos? Have you tried a different headline? And what I love about Furnished Finder is we give you so much control, and then you can go in and you can play with these things as much as you want, because it's an art and it's a science, right? And it's when you can get those two to align that you really have that magic. So I think in particular, like if you have a property and you're like, again, it's not quite ready or something, list it. Start getting those insights, start getting those things that you will get to know by getting to know that market or that property type, that you can make work for you. I think that that's just huge, getting it up earlier and better and best, and finding things where you find just the way that it works for your property and your market, because it's going to be different than a different property in your market, or it's a different market. It's all going to be, a little bit unique. So keep working to find that. Well, that's what we have for today. I think this was awesome. We are really enjoying the more data that we can give everybody here. We hope that you can take it and have some value and make some actionable decisions, try some new things out, consider some new things. And if you have not explored our stats page, it's right at your fingertips. It's great data. It's great insights. It's a fantastic place to start. So furnishedfinder.com/stats, make your login, and it'll be interesting to see what everybody comes up with.
Jeff, Katie, thank you for all the insightful tips today. You guys know your homework. Get out there, go look at the stats page and start seeing what's going on in these markets around the nation. We've given you some great tips on some markets you could start with. Flip over to the Furnished Finder map, check out your competition and your opportunities, and stay tuned to our marketing channels, our podcast, our emails, social pages, and blogs. We want to keep you up to date on any new products we have, current trends, etc. So our help center is one of those. If you want to get on furnishedfinder.com and go to the Contact Us page, we have a new revitalized help center that is just amazing for any question that you might have. And our customer service team is always there ready to be a helping hand with any questions. So thanks for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll catch you again next time.